Hi, in this video I'll discuss growth management and energy distribution in pines. There are many techniques: decandling, pinching, needle plucking, but when do you apply each, and to what species and at what time? This is a big subject in bonsai, with one of the staple types of trees that we use in bonsai, pines, and there are many different types of pines. So in order to discuss how to manage growth, we need to understand that different pines, different species of pine, have different styles or of growth. Here I will classify the different types of pine species according to their growth habit in terms of multi-flush pines and single flush pines. Within the single flush pines, short needle pines and long needle pines, and within the long needle pines, 2 needle pines or 3 and 5 needle pines. So we will go through all of this in order. But first, why this separation between multi-flush, single flush? Multi-flush pines are species probably from more coastal areas, probably from areas where they are prone to natural disasters and have a longer growing season. And these species evolved to be able to overcome such disasters and to take advantage of the longer growing season, to have a second flush in case it's necessary. It's not something that it's fully understood at the molecular level, but there are species that can reliably in bonsai culture be treated as multi-flush, and others that we know that can't. It's important to understand that the techniques for growth management here have to be used on strong growing trees and on trees where you want to distribute the energy, where you want to manage the growth, not on trees where, or parts of trees, branches, where you want to have back budding, elongation of branches, thickening of branches, healing of wounds. Multi-flush pines include Japanese black pine, Japanese red pine. Currently, Ryan Hill says that Virginia pine is also multi-flush pine. And that's about it for now as far as I know. But Japanese red pine and black pines are fairly common species in bonsai, and these are multi-flush pines. So again, a multi-flush pine is a pine where you can reliably have a second flush. So how do you manage growth and distribute energy on a multi-flush pine? On a multi-flush pine, you will decandle the first flush. So you will cut the first flush completely in all candles. Strong candles, medium strength candles, weak candles, even the ones that are barely emerged. And this will reset the system. So all the energy that went on the first flush will be lost, obviously, because we decandled the tree, and then the second flush will be produced reliably on this species. So when do you do this decandling? It depends on the size of your tree. If it is a big tree, you do it earlier, and if it's a smaller tree, you do later in the season. And the reason is that the second flush will have more time to grow on a bigger tree and become of a size that is acceptable to the silhouette of your tree. And on a smaller tree, you do it later, so the second flush doesn't have enough time to become as elongated and as big as the first, as it would be on a larger tree, or if you had done it earlier, and therefore it will fit on the silhouette of your smaller tree. The second flush, you don't touch it, but in the fall, of course, you can go and select branches and style your tree. On the tips of those of the second flush, you will have the buds that will then work as the first flush next year. To distribute energy on a multi-flush pine, you will pluck needles. So you will pluck bottom needles, you will pluck third year needles, and you will pluck needles to keep 8 to 12 pairs of needles on each bundle, so that you equalize the density of needles across the tree, using as a reference the weakest part of your tree. And that's how you distribute energy. So again, you will fully decandle the first flush. You will do that depending on the size of your tree, earlier or later in the season, while still the stem is green, meaning that it still has meristematic tissue to produce the second flush, and this bigger trees earlier and the smaller trees later, and let the second flush grow. And in the fall you can come and cut branches, prune to style your tree, and you will distribute energy with needle plucking. Now, single flush short needle pines. These are Scots pine, Mugo pine, Zuisho, and Kokonoe Japanese white pines, although these are exceptions because they are 5 needle pines, but they are a mutation of Japanese white pine, and they behave as short needle single flush pines. And we have short pine, lodgepole pine, jack pine. These are probably the majority of the species. Now, what do you do to manage growth and distribute energy on a single flush short needle pine? You pinch candles. So you will pinch the candles as they start to elongate in the spring. You will pinch the strong, and then a week later the medium, a week later the weak, and well, a week is more or less, could be a week, could be 10 days, to distribute the energy from the strong to the medium to the weak. And you will, if you miss that time, or if you still need to distribute the energy after that, you can always perform the technique which is called post-hardening pruning. And if you see, for example, here I have 4, 1, 2, 3, and the main 4 branches. Each one of these was a candle elongating this season. This is all this year's growth from here, all this year's growth. And as you can see, the stem here is still green in the middle, whereas if you compare with last year's growth, it's already gray brown. So again, it's still green here in the middle, and the last year's is already brown. When this is still green and still fleshy, that means that I can shorten this growth, always leaving a section of new growth, and this will produce buds at the base of the cut site on the remaining bundles of needles that will then grow next year. So again, you have to do that while the tissue still has the possibility to bud, to generate the buds for next year, and this means that it has to have meristematic tissue. This time of the year, which is July in Montreal, may be too late. I'm not entirely sure, simply for the fact that we have a shorter growing season here. So at what point things that come later in the season here in Montreal actually start being the ones that you have to perform earlier than in other more temperate areas with higher hardness zone numbers than here. So I will actually do a small experiment of this. This actually is a branch that the continuation of this branch is something that I don't need. Obviously, this is still nursery stock material that was not potted and was not styled. But here I can experiment, and I'll make a few experiments on this branch. I can see that it's starting to become a little darker here, but I will cut somewhere in close to it, and we will see how it if it develops buds in the central shoots that I cut. You can see this, it's still pretty much green, the stem here, but since the entire shoot is something that I don't need here, this one that I left, I will then cut the other three that are weaker and perhaps less developed, but one closer to the edge, meaning that it got here later, so like this, and one in the middle, and one short at the base here. So I cut the 4 shoots here. This is not a stylistic decision at all at this point. It's just an experiment to see where it develops buds, if at all it is too late in the season here in Montreal. It's bleeding sap. It tastes good, and we will see if it doesn't develop any buds on any of these 4 branches that were pruned now. But I pruned on the places where still the stem is green. If it doesn't bud on any of them, we will know that by this time it's already too late here in Montreal. So I'm experimenting here with our local conditions, and this is something that maybe you should do in your area. But again, this post-hardening pruning happens once the needles are separated from the stem, but the stem is still green, and then you will have buds developing at the base of this cut site, and this will generate growth next year. Now, so I mentioned pinching the candles in the spring, strong to medium to weak, a week or 10 days in succession, and post-hardening pruning where you cannot pinch anymore. And the third way that you can distribute energy on a single flush short needle pine is by coming in the fall and cutting to where you want. So for example, I don't want any of this area has too much energy, I will prune here and let this take over, for example. And of course, if I were to prune here in the middle of last year's growth, not leaving any of this year's growth, no buds will be generated in this area here. So all of these needles will eventually die, and all the section of this branch will become gin. Then what will take over the growth are the other parts where you find somewhere a growing tip. So on a pine, you always have to have a growing tip, either that is going to be produced or that is already there to have a live branch. And wherever you don't have, all this will die. So for example, if this year was too late to make these cuts here, I don't have anything else all the way down here where sorry for the airplane. No buds grow anywhere here. I don't have any buds all the way down here and into the tips of these branches. So all of this will become a gin, actually will die. These needles will die, some this year, some next year, some the year after, the ones that are from this year. And in 3 years this will be entirely void of any growth. long needle single flush pines, and first starting with the 5-needle pines. So the 5-needle pines include the Japanese white pine, the limber pine, Pinus flexilis, the eastern white pine, Pinus strobus, and this tree here is a Pinus strobus, eastern white pine. It's a 5-needle pine. It was collected this spring. It had this year's growth already. It's hard to see, but you have about an inch of growth. Here you can see it more strongly. You have about all of this growth, and here this is a single flush long needle pine and 5 needles. Now on 5 needles single flush long needle varieties, you manage the energy through the post-hardening pruning technique, the same one as for short needle single flush, but here you cannot pinch the candles. If you pinch the candles, and if I were to pinch the candles in the spring here and leave some section of the new growth on each of these candles, the remaining needles there would explode in growth. So here you cannot do that. Here you have to wait until the sheath, which is the little pellicule that envelopes the bundle of needles, the 5 needles. It's probably very hard to see from the angle where I'm filming here, but each of these needle clusters have a little pellicule, some kind of whitish to brown particle that holds all the needles together, and once they'll open and harden, this will fall. This happens around June, July in 5-needle pines, and this is the indication that you can come and perform the post-hardening pruning to distribute the energy. And that's how you treat 5-needle pines. So if you miss the time again, if the stem is no longer green, if you have about 2 or 3 weeks after the sheath falls for you to reliably expect buds to develop at the base of the cut site. And if you miss that timing, you have to wait until the fall and perform shoot selection. Here on a 5-needle single flush long needle pine, you can remove 3rd-year needles. They will fall anyway. In this pine I don't quite see much. It's hard for me to identify much of what is last year. This is 3rd year, this is 2nd year, this is 1st year, and probably here I have a few that are 3rd year, and I see their tips starting to yellow, the ones that are farther down from the growth. But this is a recently collected pine, and I will not be doing anything on it. It will be recovering for 2-3 years, and what I want with this recovery is to produce as much needle mass as possible. This will drive resources, and when the tree understands that it has enough to maintain what it has and more, it will then naturally back bud, and it will back bud wherever you see the growth rings. This tree is very young. It didn't bark up yet, other than at the very base of the trunk, but so it may back bud. You can see here maybe tiny bud here that became already, that opened up on the interior. And so this is for 5-needle pines, which are single flush long needle. So again, Japanese white pine, limber pine, eastern white pine. And of course there are species everywhere in the world that should behave the same, but I cannot tell you right now which they are. Long needle single flash pines, and these include Ponderosa pine, and the discussion will be mainly about Ponderosa pine, but the technique is the same for Japanese Haimatsu, sugar pine, Jeffrey pine, probably the North American red pine, Pinus resinosa, and a few others. There are a few species such as the Austrian black pine, Italian stone pine, Aleppo pine that have sufficient differences and nuances that I'm not sure if this technique is applicable. But in any case, the techniques used for long needle single flash pine are the safest techniques, so in any case you will not cause any detriment to your tree by doing that. So how do you manage growth on a Ponderosa pine? You let it grow. The only way to manage growth on a long needle single flash pine is to prune to internal strong growth. So the way to reduce needle size is to increase needle count, we want to facilitate the health, we want to let it grow, we want to allow the expansion of photosynthetic tissue, and so we water, we fertilize, we give it the best possible conditions. This tree here was collected perhaps last year, I'm not entirely sure, but as you can see, this year's growth is already twice as long as last year's growth. So instead of being afraid, oh my god, what's happening to my Ponderosa pine, I want the needles short, what should I do? You should make it get stronger and even bigger needles. And with time, when the limited resources that go into the pot have to be distributed across a much larger number of needles, then the growth of the needles on that situation will be shorter. Once you have a Ponderosa pine in refinement in a pot, then you can dial down fertilization through the year and only fertilize in the fall. And this fall fertilization will be enough to produce the flush for next year's spring and maintain the short needle that is what you want depending on the silhouette of your tree. You may want longer needles too, but they can grow a lot. So for example, if I were to come in the spring or even now and cut some of this year's growth using the short needle post-hardening pruning technique, this would cause the remaining needles from this year to explode in length. So in order to prevent the explosion in growth of needle size, the time to work on a Ponderosa pine is around September, and that time may vary where you are, but the indication for that is that the third year needles start falling. That's the indication that you can come and prune, and you prune always to strong internal growth. For example, here I could prune to this shoot here and remove all of that, and this will be the new leader of this branch for next year. Here you cannot use the post-hardening pruning because by the time that you make the cut, the meristematic tissue is already gone. So you would be left with an extremity of a branch without buds, so no buds will be produced, so that branch, as I explained earlier, will eventually become a gin. So here the only way to manage energy is to cut to internal growth, and the way to have needle shortening and back budding is to fertilize heavily so that you can have buds, adventitious buds being created where the bark didn't creep up yet. So all this area where you still see the growth rings you can still have back buds. So it's a run against the clock in a sense, that you have to fertilize a lot, let it produce a lot of growth, and then in the fall, after the third year, needles fall, prone to strong internal growth, and to buds that were produced before the bark creeped up. Again, on a long needle single flush pine, you will fertilize heavily with development. You produce a lot of photosynthetic mass, a lot of needles, and once you want to refine your tree, you then prune back to internal growth once the third year needles fall. If I come now and prune to internal growth now, the new needles on this internal growth, those will explode in length. Now, maybe you want to do that, but there is no reason why, because this is contributing to the health of the tree, to bringing resources all the way here, and this will produce more back budding. It is actually ineffective to cut now, because you will be slowing down the development of this branch, the production of back budding. Another question that is often asked is when to perform the styling of a long needle single flush such as a Ponderosa pine. And again, the logic is quite simple if you think about it. The best time to style it is in the early fall, around September, when you perform the branch selection. This is because then you will generate resources, you will store resources on the root system for next spring flush, which is reflective of the needle density, the needle count, the branches that you have in the tree at the moment. If I have a very strong tree and I prune it and style it later on or earlier in the spring, all the energy that I have stored in the roots is reflective of the larger needle mass, and so when the tree starts growing, it will push all that energy on the remaining growing tips at the time, and so it will again explode and grow. So the time to style a Ponderosa pine, the time to do the shoot selection is in the early fall. Now, in this video we discussed different types of species: multi-flush, single flush, short needle, single flush, long needle, which are 5 needles, or 2 needle or 3 needle like Ponderosa pine, and the different techniques to apply different times of the year to manage the growth, to distribute energy. And the idea is quite simple. Again, on a multi-flush pine, you take advantage of that multi-flush behavior, and then you can manage the growth of the second flush that will come reliably on those species, depending on when you decandle the tree. And again, you decandle completely all the candles, the strong, the medium, the weak, the barely emerged. You let grow the second flush, and in the fall, of course, you can do branch selection and so on. On a short needle single flush, you do pinching of the candles, because there is no danger that the remaining needles on the pinched candle will explode in growth. And so you do that in the spring to distribute energy. And if you miss that time, or if you still want to further work on that tree, you can do the post-hardening pruning technique, which is while the stem is still green, cut somewhere, leaving some new needles, and you will have buds developing at the cut site. But this you have to done while there is still meristematic tissue. As you saw in the Mugo pine that I did some pruning on one of the branches, This is, according to Ryan Neal, probably the tail end of the timing for doing that. I'm experimenting here in Montreal to see what happens with this Mugo pine. We will see, I'll let you know. And this post-hardening pruning technique is the way also to manage growth and to distribute energy across the tree. And the third thing that you can do is come back in the fall and do shoot selection. On a long needle single flush like a Ponderosa pine, you cannot perform the post-hardening pruning, because if you perform that technique, all the remaining needles in that branch will explode in length. So you will be voiding your interest in managing the growth. So the only thing left to do is to come in the fall and perform shoot selection. And you do that early in September, and if you need to style, or if you want to style a Ponderosa, you do that at that time. And the indication again is when the third year needles fall, and with that it will store the plant will store energy over the fall, which is reflective of the amount of needles and growing tips that it has at the moment. On single flush pines, you do not pluck needles. On single flush pines, you only pluck the bottom facing needles when you're styling, or needles that you need to remove for wiring, or even needles that were properly facing up this year, but then you have a new shoot that comes. Those needles, second year needles, will then face down, and you can remove those. So for aesthetic reasons, you remove needles, bottom facing needles that affect your wiring, but as much as possible you want to keep as much photosynthetic area in your tree to generate back budding in any pine. And so of all these techniques, how do you know what to apply on your species of pine if you don't know if it's multi-flush or single flush? And the idea is that the safest technique, if you don't know, is to do the post-hardening pruning technique of single flush short needle pine, because if your tree happens to be, if the species of pine that you're working with happens to be multi-flush, you will have a second flush. If your tree is a single flush, you will have buds produced. Now of course, if your tree happens to be long needle, the remaining needles will explode in length, but you will also have the buds generated. So a little setback, but it's still at an exploratory time with your tree, so it's all good. And the safest technique to use is always the fall shoot selection technique, where you don't do anything during the year to that tree, and you style it in the fall, you shoot select in the fall, and that's it. This is a broad stroke of the information that as I understand it now, to manage growth and to distribute energy across all species of pine depending on their growth habit, multi-flush or single flush, short needle, long needle, 5 needle, where the cue to perform the post-hardening pruning is the fall of the sheath that holds the bundle of needles as they open. And on Ponderosa pine, the only technique that we use is shoot selection in the fall, so pruning to strong internal growth, and the indication is that the third year needles start to fall. And if you want back budding, you keep as much strength on your tree as possible. The more resources being drawn on a branch, the more likely this branch is to produce internal buds, because they have the resources, all the sugar and all the water going through. I hope this video was instructive and clear, and if you have questions, please ask in the comments below. Please subscribe, and if you are interested in particular aspects of bonsai technique or style or philosophy, please comment below, and I will consider it for future videos. Thank you for watching.